When they left me alone on that dark highway, with the sound of crickets as my only company and the cold pre-dawn air biting at my skin, I didn't cry. I simply took out my phone, dialed 3 numbers, and in less than 10 minutes, I canceled everything I had paid for that family. The luxury hotels where they planned to stay, the exclusive restaurants I had reserved, the additional credit cards they thought were theirs forever, everything. While they drove away laughing in the car I had rented, thinking they had left me in ruin, I was already planning how they would spend the longest night of their lives. But it had all started so differently. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. 3 months ago, when I decided to organize this family trip, my house smelled of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee. It was a Sunday morning, and the golden light filtered through the lace curtains I had sewn years ago. My son, Mark, was sitting on the blue velvet sofa, where his father used to read the newspaper. Carol, my daughter-in-law, was pretending to admire the family photographs on the mantelpiece, but I noticed how her eyes were calculating the value of each silver frame, of every piece of porcelain china I had inherited from my mother. Stella, my 17-year-old granddaughter, was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Her eyes sparkled when I showed her pictures of the coastal resort, the excursions I had planned, and the beachfront restaurants where we would eat fresh seafood. But even then, something about Carol's smile unnerved me. It was too wide, too perfect, as if she were posing for a photograph that would never be taken. "Mom, this must be costing you a fortune," Mark had said, but not with concern, rather with a strange curiosity, as if he were evaluating my finances. Carol nodded beside him, her fingers drumming softly on the leather bag I had gifted her the previous year. "Yes, Jane. Are you sure you can afford all this?" I should have noticed the tone then. It wasn't affection. It was an interrogation. But I just wanted to get my family back, to feel I had a purpose again after so many years of loneliness since my husband passed away. So I smiled and told them not to worry, that I had saved my entire life for moments like this. Over the next few weeks, while I planned every detail of the trip, I started to notice things, hushed whispers that stopped when I entered the room, knowing glances between Carol and Mark during family dinners. Carol had begun to ask me about my bank accounts, my will, and who managed my important documents, all disguised as filial concern. But I had lived too long not to recognize greed when it was staring me in the face. The week before the trip, Carol came to my house with a folder full of papers. "My dear Jane," she said in that honeyed voice she used when she wanted something, "Mark and I have been thinking at your age, maybe it would be better if someone younger managed your finances, just to protect you." Of course, the documents were powers of attorney, account transfers, and changes to the beneficiaries of my insurance policies. It was all very legal, all very convenient for them. That night, while they thought I was asleep, I heard them planning. Carol spoke of houses they could sell, investments they could make, and how I was losing my faculties and needed protection. Mark, my own son, nodded at every word as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They talked about me as if I were already dead, as if my only purpose was to fund their dreams of wealth. That's when I knew this trip wouldn't be a reconciliation. It would be a test. The last chance to see if there was anything left of the family I had raised, or if they were just strangers waiting for my inheritance. The day of departure arrived with a fine rain that beat against my windows like small, impatient fingers. I had packed my suitcase the night before, folding each garment with the care of someone who knows they might not return the same way. The lavender perfume from my drawers clung to my clothes like a final hug from home. Carol and Mark arrived punctually, but something about their movements felt strange, too coordinated, as if they had rehearsed every gesture. "Ready for the adventure, Mom?" Mark asked, carrying my suitcase with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Carol was constantly checking her phone, her red-painted nails drumming against the screen. Stella jumped out of the car and hugged me with the effusiveness of a 17-year-old, but even she seemed quieter than usual. During the drive to the coast, I sat in the back seat, watching Carol whisper things to Mark while he drove. Every time I made a comment about the hotels or the reservations, they exchanged those glances I knew all too well. Carol had started calling me Dear Jane, with a frequency that got on my nerves. People who love you don't need to remind you of it every 5 minutes. We stopped at a gas station after 3 hours of driving. While Mark was filling the tank, I went to the restroom and heard Carol talking softly on the phone. Yes, everything's going according to plan. She doesn't suspect a thing. Tomorrow night will be perfect when she's most tired and confused. My blood ran cold. A plan? What plan? I went back to the car pretending I hadn't heard anything, but my mind was already racing. I discreetly took out my phone and checked my bank accounts, my cards, the confirmations for all the reservations. Everything was under my control. Everything was still in my name. But what were they planning? We arrived at the first hotel at dusk. It was a beautiful place facing the ocean, with palm trees swaying gently in the salty breeze. The lobby smelled of tropical flowers and polished wood. When I approached the front desk to check in, Carol stepped forward. "Let me do it, Jane. You're tired from the trip." "Good afternoon," she said to the receptionist with her best smile. "We're here to check in. The reservation is under Jane Miller." The young man at the desk typed on his computer and nodded. "Yes, it's here. 3 rooms, 1 suite, and 2 standard. I just need a credit card for incidentals." I reached out to hand him my card, but Carol intercepted it. "Oh, better use this one," she said, handing him a golden card I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Miller prefers to use this account for travel." The receptionist took the card without question, but I froze. Since when did Carol have a card in my name that I didn't know about? That night at the hotel dinner, Carol insisted on ordering the most expensive dishes on the menu. "Come on, Jane, you're paying for everything. We should enjoy it." But there was something in her tone that unnerved me. It wasn't gratitude. It was possession, as if she already considered my money hers. After dinner, Mark walked me to my room. "Mom," he said in the hallway, "tomorrow, Carol and I want to talk to you about something important regarding your future, about how we can help you better." His words sounded rehearsed, mechanical. "We think you've been very stressed lately, a little scattered. It's not your fault. It's normal at your age." I closed my room door with my heart pounding. Scattered. The word followed me as I prepared for bed. I checked my purse twice. I confirmed that my phone was charged and that I had all my important documents. Something told me I was going to need them. At 2 a.m., I heard voices in the hallway. Carol and Mark were talking outside my door. "It has to be tomorrow," Carol said. "The longer we wait, the more risk there is of her figuring it out." "But Mom isn't stupid," Mark replied in a tone I had never heard before, cold and calculating. "We have to make it look natural, like it was her decision." I moved closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. "The place you picked is perfect," Carol continued. "Far from everything, no phone signal, no witnesses. When we leave her there, she'll understand she has no choice but to do what we say." "What if she refuses?" Mark asked. She won't refuse. She'll be scared, alone, with no money. She'll sign everything we put in front of her. I stepped back from the door with my legs trembling. Now I understood the plan. They were going to take me somewhere isolated. They were going to abandon me so I would sign the documents Carol had brought. They thought that without money, without help, without options, I would become vulnerable and desperate. But what they didn't know was that I had grown up in an era where women had to be smarter than men to survive, and that from the moment I heard that first whispered conversation, I also had my own plan. The next morning dawned with a clear sky that brutally contrasted with the storm brewing in my chest. I woke up before dawn, as had always been my custom since I was young and worked at my father's bakery. The silence of the hotel allowed me to think clearly as I watched the sunrise paint the ocean orange. I knew today would be the day. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. During breakfast, Carol was especially attentive. She poured me coffee, spread jam on my toast, and asked if I had slept well. Her performance was perfect, but I already knew the script. Mark constantly checked his phone as if he were coordinating something. Stella, my poor granddaughter, ate in silence, but I noticed how she looked at me from time to time with a concern she couldn't hide. "Jane, dear," Carol said, delicately wiping her lips with a napkin, "Mark and I think it would be nice to go on a special excursion today. We know a beautiful, very quiet place where we can talk about those important things we mentioned yesterday." Her smile was radiant, but her eyes held that coldness I had learned to recognize. "Yes, Mom," Mark added. "It's a place Carol discovered last year. Very private, very special, perfect for intimate family conversations." The word private rang in my head like an alarm bell. Private meant isolated. Isolated meant no witnesses. I accepted with the sweetness of a naive grandmother. But while they were finishing breakfast, I was mentally reviewing every detail of my own plan. I had spent the early morning hours awake, not out of fear, but organizing every move I would make from that moment on. I had everything prepared on my phone, emergency numbers, screenshots of all my accounts, and the voice recorder activated. We got into the rented car around 10 a.m. Mark drove with that false confidence of someone who believes they have everything under control. Carol was checking a map on her phone, giving him directions to that special place they had chosen. I sat in the back with Stella, who remained strangely silent, nervously playing with her bracelets. "Grandma," Stella whispered to me when her parents were distracted, arguing about the route. "Are you okay?" She couldn't finish the sentence, but her eyes told me everything I needed to know. My granddaughter had heard the same conversation I had. The fear on her face broke my heart. I squeezed her hand gently and smiled. "Everything is going to be all right, my love. Grandma knows how to take care of herself." Stella nodded, but I saw a silent tear roll down her cheek. She knew what was going to happen, but she was just a child caught between loyalty to her parents and love for her grandmother. The journey felt longer than usual. We left the main highway and ventured onto secondary roads, then onto dirt paths that kicked up dust around the car. The trees became denser, the houses scarcer, until finally there was nothing but wild vegetation and silence. Carol constantly checked her phone and nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. No signal here. It's going to be a very private conversation." Finally, we stopped in a clearing next to what looked like an old abandoned gas station. The place was desolate, with weeds growing between the rusted pumps and broken windows that reflected fragments of the sky like blind eyes. Carol and Mark got out of the car with a strange energy, like actors finally arriving at the main scene of their play. "Come on, Jane," Carol said to me in that syrupy voice that now made me nauseous. "Let's walk a little. We need some fresh air for this very important conversation." Mark took a folder from the car, the same folder full of papers that Carol had brought to my house weeks ago. Stella stayed in the car, but I saw her in the rear-view mirror wiping away tears. My heart broke for her, because she knew she was about to lose her parents in a way she never could have imagined. We walked to an area where there were some large rocks that could serve as makeshift seats. Carol spread a blanket she had brought to make it more comfortable, but I knew it was for the staging of their big moment. The silence of the place was absolute, broken only by the sound of the wind through the dry leaves. "Well, Jane," Mark began, sitting across from me with the folder in his hands, "it's time we talked seriously about your situation." Carol sat beside him, and for the first time on the whole trip, their masks began to fall. There were no more fake smiles or sweet words. "We're very worried about your financial situation," Carol continued in a completely different, colder, more direct tone. "A woman your age with so much money, living alone. It's dangerous. There are a lot of bad people who take advantage of the elderly." The irony of her words would have made me laugh if the moment hadn't been so sinister. Mark opened the folder and spread the documents on the blanket. Powers of attorney, bank transfers, beneficiary changes. Everything was there, waiting for my signature. "Mom, you need to sign these papers. It's for your own good, to protect you." His voice sounded mechanical, rehearsed. I looked at both of them in silence for a long moment. Carol drummed her red nails against her purse. Mark avoided my gaze. The wind moved the dry leaves around us with a whisper that sounded like a warning. Then I took out my phone. "Before I sign anything," I said with a calmness that surprised even myself, "I need to make a call." Carol stiffened when she saw my phone. "Jane, dear, there's no signal here," she said with a nervous laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "We already checked. It's better to focus on this very important conversation." But I had already dialed the number, and to their horror, the call connected perfectly. "Attorney Arnold, it's Jane Miller. Yes, the one who updated her will last week." Mark's face fell apart. Carol tried to snatch the phone from me, but I moved away with an agility they didn't know I still possessed. "I'm here with my son and my daughter-in-law who insist I sign some documents. Could you please explain the current legal situation of my assets to them?" I put the phone on speaker, and Attorney Arnold's voice filled that desolate place like thunder. "Mrs. Miller, as we agreed, you maintain total control of all your assets. Any document presented to you without my supervision would be legally invalid. Furthermore, I have documentation of our conversations where you expressed your suspicions about possible fraudulent attempts by relatives." The silence that followed was deafening. Carol had lost all color in her face. Mark looked at the papers as if they had come to life. "Thank you, attorney. I'll keep you informed." I hung up and looked at them with a tranquility I had been cultivating for weeks. "Did you really think I was so naive?" I asked as I put my phone away. "You thought a woman who built a business from scratch, who raised a son alone after being widowed, who survived economic crises and betrayals, wouldn't see through your little play." Carol was the first to react, and her mask of the loving daughter-in-law completely collapsed. "Listen to me, you stupid old woman," she hissed in a voice she had never used in front of me. "You're going to sign those papers right now, or you're going to regret it. We brought you here because you have no other option." Mark nodded, his true face emerging like a snake shedding its skin. "Mom, don't be difficult. Nobody's going to come help you here. There are no houses, no phones, no nothing. Either you sign or you stay here until you change your mind. I slowly got up from the blanket, shaking the dry leaves off my dress. Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is? I said, looking them in the eyes in turn. It's not that you want to rob me. It's that you truly believed I was stupid enough to fall into your trap. I took out my phone again and showed them the screen. This call has been recorded since we got here. Your threats, your plan to abandon me, it's all documented. Carol tried to grab my phone again, but I had already sent the recording to 3 different contacts. Besides, I continued, as I walked toward the car where Stella was watching us with tears in her eyes, did you really think I would come to an isolated place without taking precautions? Attorney Arnold knows exactly where we are. If I don't return or confirm that I'm safe within the hour, he will contact the authorities. Mark ran after me. Mom, wait. It doesn't have to be like this. We can talk. We can reach an agreement. But his voice had lost all authority. Now he was the scared boy I remembered from his childhood when I caught him lying about his school grades. The only possible agreement, I said, stopping before I reached the car, is that you take me back to the hotel right now, pick up your things, and disappear from my life forever. Carol approached with eyes full of fury. And what if we refuse? What if we leave you here just like we planned? I smiled for the first time all day, a smile I had learned from my mother when she faced abusive debt collectors in difficult times. Then you'll find out what it feels like to be completely broke in an unknown place. I took out my phone again and opened my bank app. See that golden card you used at the hotel yesterday, Carol? It's an additional card on my account that I can cancel with one click. Her eyes widened when she understood the implications. The car we're driving is rented with my credit card. The hotel rooms are reserved in my name. Your return flights are paid for with my money. Mark turned pale. You wouldn't do that. We're your family. My family wouldn't have brought me to an isolated place to threaten and rob me, I replied with a firmness that came from deep within my being. My family wouldn't have planned to abandon me on a dark highway. You stopped being my family the moment you decided my money was more important than my well-being. Carol screamed with a frustration she could no longer contain. You're a selfish old woman. All that money is going to be ours when you die anyway. We're just speeding up the inevitable. Exactly, I said, walking toward the car door. It was our future, because last night, while you were planning my kidnapping, I changed my will. Stella will be my sole heir when she turns 25. Until then, everything will go to charity. The silence that followed was like a tomb. Mark slumped onto the rocks where they had spread their useless documents. Carol began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure rage. I opened the car door where Stella was waiting for me. Come on, my love, I said to my granddaughter. It's time you met your real family. Stella hugged me the moment I got into the car, her tears wetting my blouse as she trembled like a leaf in a storm. Grandma, I'm so sorry, she sobbed against my shoulder. I knew something bad was going to happen, but I didn't know how to warn you without betraying my parents. I stroked her hair with the tenderness I had reserved for her since she was born, feeling my heart break for this innocent child caught in the middle of her parents' greed. You have nothing to apologize for, my darling, I whispered, as Carol and Mark argued outside the car in increasingly loud voices. You're the only one who kept your heart pure in all this. Stella pulled away from me and looked at me with those eyes she had inherited from her grandfather, full of a premature wisdom that the situation had forced her to develop. Is what you said about the will true? She asked in a trembling voice, Are you really going to leave everything to me? I took her hands in mine, feeling how cold they were despite the heat of the day. It's true, but I hope you understand that it's not just about the money. It's about preserving the values your great-grandmother taught me, the same ones I tried to instill in your father, and that he chose to forget. Outside, Carol had started hitting the car windows. Stella, get out of there right now. That manipulative old woman is filling your head with lies. Her face was distorted by a fury that made her unrecognizable. Mark was trying to calm her down, but I could see in his gestures that he, too, was desperate. I started the car with the keys they had left in the ignition, confident that I wouldn't know how to drive or wouldn't dare to leave them. How little they knew the woman who had driven delivery trucks when the family business required it. "Grandma, what are you doing?" Stella asked, as I adjusted the mirrors with the precision of someone who had been driving for decades. "What should have been done a long time ago, my love? Protecting the two of us." I rolled down the window just enough for Carol and Mark to hear me. "You have two options," I shouted over the engine's noise. "You can walk to the main highway and find help, or you can stay here and reflect on your decisions. In any case, Stella and I are leaving." Carol clung to the door handle like a desperate woman. "You can't take my daughter. She's a minor. I'm going to sue you for kidnapping." But her threat sounded hollow even to her. Stella spoke from the passenger seat in a voice that sounded more mature than her 17 years should allow. "Mom, Dad," she said, looking at them through the glass, "I choose to go with Grandma. You tried to hurt the only person who truly loves us unconditionally." My granddaughter's words were like daggers for Carol, who finally let go of the handle and backed away as if the car were on fire. I put the car in gear and we began to move slowly down the dusty path. In the rearview mirror, I saw Carol running after us, shouting incoherent threats, while Mark stood still among the scattered papers that the wind was beginning to blow away. It was an image that would be etched in my memory forever. My predators reduced to what they truly were, desperate and empty people without my money to sustain them. "Where are we going, Grandma?" Stella asked, as I navigated back to the main highway. "First, we're going to pick up our things from the hotel," I replied, feeling the tension of the last few weeks finally begin to leave my shoulders. "Then we're going to cancel their rooms and their return flights. They can find their own way home." During the drive back, Stella told me everything she had observed over the past few weeks. How Carol had been photographing documents in my house, how they had been rehearsing conversations about my mental decline, how they had planned to use my own words about feeling lonely to justify their takeover. My granddaughter had been a silent witness to her parents' every move, carrying the weight of that terrible knowledge. "Why didn't you tell me anything sooner?" I asked her as we pulled into the hotel parking lot. Stella looked down, ashamed. "Because they're my parents, Grandma. I thought maybe I was misunderstanding things, that maybe they were really worried about you." Her voice broke at the end of the sentence. "My love," I said, stopping before getting out of the car. "What you just went through is going to teach you the most important lesson of your life. Real family isn't the one that shares your blood. It's the one that respects your dignity. Remember that forever." We entered the hotel holding hands, like two generations of women who had survived a betrayal. The front desk staff greeted us with professional smiles, unaware they were witnessing the moment a grandmother and her granddaughter became the only true allies they would have in the world. As we went up in the elevator to our rooms, Stella asked me in a very small voice, "Grandma, do you think Mom and Dad will ever understand what they did wrong?" I looked at her through the reflection in the metal elevator doors and saw in her eyes the same hope I had held for years. "I don't know, my love," I replied with honesty, but it's no longer our responsibility to teach them. We arrived at our rooms, and I began to pack with the efficiency of someone who had made a final decision. Every garment I folded, every object I put away, felt like a small act of liberation. Stella helped me in silence, but I could see in her movements the confusion of a teenager who had just seen her parents reveal their true nature. I went down to the front desk with my suitcase and asked the manager to accompany me to a private area. "I need to cancel 2 rooms and make some changes to the payment methods," I explained with the calmness of someone who had planned every move. The man, a middle-aged gentleman with glasses, listened attentively as I explained that there had been a family problem and that 2 of the guests would no longer be responsible for any expenses. "I also need to cancel all additional cards associated with my account," I continued, taking out my phone to call the bank. "It's a family security measure." The manager nodded with professional discretion, although I could see the curiosity in his eyes. In hotels like this, he had surely seen many family dramas. While I made the necessary calls, I heard the sound of a car arriving in the parking lot. Through the lobby window, I saw a battered taxi from which Carol and Mark got out, both covered in dust and with expressions of absolute fury. Carol walked with a slight limp, likely from trying to run in heels on the rocky path. "Ma'am," the manager said to me after I finished the paperwork, "the other guests have just arrived. Is there anything else you need me to do before they come up?" I smiled with a tranquility that surprised even myself. "Yes, please inform them that their rooms have been canceled, and they are no longer authorized to charge expenses to my account. If they wish to continue their stay, they will need to make their own reservations and payments." The moment had come. Carol and Mark entered the lobby like a storm, their clothes disheveled and their faces marked by the walk in the sun. Carol went straight to me with an aggressiveness that made other guests turn to watch. "Where's my daughter?" she demanded in a loud voice, not caring about the scene she was causing. "Stella is safe," I replied, unfazed, "and she has voluntarily decided to stay with me." Mark tried a different approach, approaching me with his hands out as if to hug me. "Mom, please, let's talk calmly. We're all upset, but we're family. Family doesn't abandon its members on dark highways," I replied, avoiding his fake hug. "Family doesn't plan robberies or threaten its elders." Carol lost the last vestiges of composure. "You robbed us. You left us with no money, no car in the middle of nowhere. I gave you exactly what you were going to give me," I retorted, as the hotel manager discreetly approached, clearly ready to intervene if the situation escalated. "The difference is that you deserved to be alone and helpless. I did not." Stella appeared at that moment, coming down the stairs with her own suitcase, the image of my granddaughter walking toward us with silent determination. It was like seeing a young version of myself. Carol ran toward her. "Stella, tell this crazy woman to come back with us immediately." But my granddaughter stopped halfway down the stairs and spoke in a voice that resonated throughout the lobby. "Mom, Dad, I heard you planning to hurt Grandma. I heard you talk about her as if she were already dead. I heard you decide to abandon her, to rob her." Each word was like a slap to Carol and Mark. "Stella, you don't understand the whole situation," Mark tried to explain, but his daughter interrupted him with a maturity that filled me with pride and pain at the same time. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you chose money over love. I understand that you were willing to traumatize your own mother to get what you wanted." Carol tried one last desperate resort. "This is manipulation! That old woman is poisoning my daughter against us!" But even as she screamed, I could see in her eyes that she knew she had lost. Not just my money, but her daughter, her dignity, and any chance of redemption. The hotel manager finally approached. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices or continue this conversation somewhere else. You're disturbing other guests." Carol looked at him with contempt, but Mark had the decency to look ashamed. "Don't worry," I said to the manager and the other guests who were discreetly watching. "We're leaving now." I took Stella's hand, and we walked toward the exit. Carol followed us, yelling legal threats, promises of lawsuits, and vows that this wasn't over. At the hotel door, I stopped and turned to them one last time. "Carol, Mark," I said in a voice that carried decades of experience and wisdom. "You're going to have a lot of time to reflect on your decisions. I hope you eventually understand that true love is priceless, and that by trying to put a price on it, you lost the only thing that really mattered." Mark took a step toward me, and for a moment I saw a glimmer of the boy I had raised. "Mom, is there no way to fix this?" His voice broke slightly, and I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost, son," I said with a sadness that came from deep within my heart. "You didn't want to fix anything when you had the chance. You wanted to take by force what you had never earned with love." We left the hotel for the car I had rented in my name. Behind us, Carol was still screaming, but her words were lost in the wind like dry leaves. Stella and I got into the car in silence. As I started the engine and we began to drive away, I saw my ex-family in the rearview mirror, standing at the hotel entrance, reduced to two solitary figures without money, without transport, and without dignity. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath and felt something close to peace. We drove for 2 hours in a comfortable silence before Stella finally asked where we were going. The landscape had changed from the tropical coast to green mountains, dotted with small colonial towns that looked like they were from a postcard. "There's a place your grandfather and I discovered many years ago," I explained, as I took a detour onto a winding road. "A small family-owned hotel where no one will bother us while we decide what to do with our lives." The Hope House Inn appeared before us like an oasis after so many hours of tension. It was an old adobe and red-tiled building, surrounded by gardens full of bougainvillea and the scent of jasmine that floated in the afternoon air. The woman who greeted us, a robust woman in her 50s with a genuine smile, treated us as if we were expected guests rather than refugees from a family drama. "Will you need separate rooms or connecting?" she asked, while checking availability in an old ledger, not a modern computer. "Connecting, please," I replied, feeling Stella relax beside me. "My granddaughter and I need to be close to each other for a while." That night, we had dinner on the hotel terrace, under paper lights that swayed gently in the mountain breeze. Stella had regained some color in her cheeks, and for the first time all day, she smiled when the waitress brought her a special homemade dessert. "Grandma," she said to me as we shared a homemade flan, "do you think I did the right thing by choosing to stay with you?" "My love," I replied, taking her hand across the table, "what you did was choose respect over convenience. You chose true love over comfort. Those are always the right decisions, even if they are the most difficult." Stella nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she still struggled with the guilt of having betrayed her parents. Over the next few days, we established a routine that helped us both heal. We had an early breakfast in the garden, walked the mountain trails, and in the afternoons we sat in the hotel library, where Stella did her schoolwork that she had downloaded online, and I read books I hadn't had time to enjoy in years. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that my phone started ringing insistently. Carol and Mark had managed to get back to the city and were now launching their counterattack. The calls came one after another: legal threats, desperate pleas, attempts at emotional manipulation. "Mom, Stella is missing school. You're taking her away from her normal life," Mark's voice said in one of the voicemails. Stella listened to some of these messages, and her face clouded over. "Grandma, maybe I should go back. I don't want to cause you legal problems." But I had already spoken with Attorney Arnold, who had assured me that as a grandmother, I had legal rights, especially considering that Stella had voluntarily expressed her desire to be with me, and that there were recordings of her parents planning fraudulent activities. The only legal problems they're going to have are if they continue to harass us, I assured my granddaughter as I blocked Carol and Mark's numbers. Besides, you're studying, you're safe, and you're learning more about life in these weeks than in years of living with that toxicity. One morning, as we were having breakfast in the garden, Stella asked me the question she had been avoiding since we left the coastal hotel. "Grandma, are you really going to leave Mom and Dad with nothing?" Her voice had no judgment, just genuine curiosity about my intentions. I put my coffee cup on the table and looked toward the mountains stretching in the distance. "My love, what I did was protect what was rightfully mine. They still have their jobs, their skills, their youth. What they lost was easy access to money they never earned." I paused before continuing. "But if they prove they have truly changed, that they understand what they did wrong, maybe in the future I can reconsider some things." Stella nodded slowly. "And what's going to happen to me? Will I be able to see my parents again someday?" The question broke my heart because I recognized in it the same dilemma I had faced: love for family versus the need to protect oneself from their toxicity. "When you turn 18 in a few months," I explained carefully, "you'll be a legal adult and you'll be able to make all your own decisions. And by then, if your parents have genuinely reflected and changed, if they have sought professional help to understand why they were willing to hurt their own family for money, then you can decide if you want to rebuild a relationship with them." "And in the meantime," she asked, with a maturity that impressed me more every day. "In the meantime," I replied, feeling a fierce determination settle in my chest, "you're going to live with me. You're going to finish high school. You're going to go to college, and you're going to learn that you are valuable for who you are, not for what you can give to others." That afternoon, while Stella studied in the library, I walked alone through the hotel gardens, reflecting on the decisions I had made. It hadn't been easy to cut ties with my son, but it also hadn't been easy to raise him alone after being widowed, or to rebuild my life after every crisis. Women of my generation had learned that sometimes true love requires difficult decisions. My phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. It was Carol, writing from a different phone because I had blocked hers. "Jane, please, we just want to talk. Mark is very depressed. We can reach an agreement." I read the message without feeling the pang of guilt I had expected. Instead, I felt a crystalline clarity about what I had to do. I didn't reply to the message. Instead, I sat on a bench under a mango tree and called Attorney Arnold to make sure all the legal documents were in order and that Stella was completely protected. When I finished the call, I took a deep breath of the pure mountain air and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what the future might bring. 6 months after our arrival at the Hope House Inn, the tranquility was broken in the most unexpected way. I was watering the plants in the small garden that the hotel owner had allowed me to tend when I heard the sound of a car arriving on the gravel path. It wasn't unusual for new guests to arrive, but something about the sound of the engine made me look up with apprehension. Carol and Mark got out of a rental car, but they were not the same people I had seen in the lobby of the Coastal Hotel. Carol had lost weight. Her clothes were wrinkled, and her hair, once always perfectly styled, hung lifelessly around her gaunt face. Mark walked with his shoulders slumped, as if he were carrying an invisible weight that was crushing him to the ground. "Mom!" Mark shouted from the parking lot. "We need to talk to you, please, just 5 minutes." His voice sounded broken, very different from the calculating tone he had used on that desolate road. Carol remained by the car as if she were afraid to get any closer. Stella appeared on the hotel terrace, clearly alerted by the voices. Our eyes met, and I could see the internal conflict that was tearing her apart. Despite everything she had witnessed, they were still her parents. "Do you want me to talk to them?" she asked me with a maturity that broke my heart a little more each day. "It's your decision, my love," I replied, as I put the watering can next to the bougainvillea. "But if you decide to, I'll be right by your side." Stella nodded, and together we walked toward where Carol and Mark were waiting. "Stella, my girl," Carol said in a trembling voice, extending her arms toward her daughter. But Stella did not run toward her as she had done throughout her childhood. Instead, she stood firmly by my side, taking my hand in a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than any words. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Dad," Stella said with a coldness that clearly surprised them. "How did you find us?" Mark looked at the ground before answering. "We hired a private investigator. We knew you had to be somewhere with your grandma." "So you spent money you don't have looking for me," Stella observed with a perception that filled me with pride, "instead of using it to reflect on why you left in the first place." Carol winced at her daughter's words. "Listen," I said finally, "you can talk, but it will be here in public with witnesses. I will not allow you to manipulate Stella in private." The hotel owner, Ms. Rose, had discreetly appeared at the entrance, clearly ready to intervene if the situation required it. Carol was the first to speak, and her voice trembled with an emotion that seemed genuine. "Jane, these have been the worst days of our lives. We lost our jobs because we couldn't get back in time. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our house. Stella," her voice broke. "Stella, your room is exactly how you left it. Every night I look at your empty bed and I realize what we lost." Mark took over, and I could see real tears in his eyes. "Mom, I know what we did was unforgivable. I have no excuses. I let financial pressure and greed turn me into someone I don't recognize. I betrayed everything you taught me about family and respect." "And what do you expect me to do with this information?" I asked, not allowing emotion to cloud my judgment. "Feel sorry for you? Forget that you took me to an isolated place to threaten and rob me?" Carol sobbed openly, but I had learned to distinguish between tears of remorse and tears of self-pity. "We don't expect you to forgive us immediately," Mark said, "but we hope you'll give us the opportunity to prove that we can change. We've started family therapy. I have the receipts here." He took several wrinkled papers from his pocket. "We've also talked to a financial advisor to learn how to manage our finances better without depending on anyone else." Stella spoke for the first time since the initial greetings. "And what about me? Do you expect me to come back as if nothing happened? As if I hadn't heard you plan to abandon my grandma on a highway?" Her voice hardened with each word. "As if I hadn't seen your true faces when you thought you had won." Carol took a step closer, but stopped when Stella instinctively backed away. "My love, we understand you need time. We didn't come here to demand that you return immediately. We came to beg for a chance to rebuild what we destroyed." "Rebuilding takes time," I intervened, feeling it was time to set clear boundaries. and it requires real change, not just pretty words when things get difficult. I looked Mark directly in the eyes. Son, for 40 years I gave you everything you needed. I paid for your education. I helped you with the house. I lent you money when Carol lost her job last year, and your gratitude was to plan to rob me. There's no justification for what we did, Mark admitted. But Mom, we were desperate. The credit card debts, the house payments, Stella's expenses, everything got out of control. Carol nodded vigorously. We thought if we had access to your money, we could solve everything quickly and then give it back to you. Give it back to me? I repeated with disbelief. You were going to give me back my own inheritance after stealing it? You were going to ask my permission to use my money after canceling my legal capacity to say no. The silence that followed was deafening. Stella cleared her throat. Mom, Dad, I want you to understand something. Grandma isn't holding me here against my will. I'm here because this is the first time in my life that I feel completely safe and valued for who I am, not for what I can give someone else. Stella is right, I continued. You can seek all the therapy in the world, but until you understand that love is not negotiated and that family is not extorted, there is no basis for rebuilding anything. I looked toward the mountain that rose behind the hotel. When you are capable of loving us unconditionally, without hidden agendas, without plans for personal gain, then we can talk about second chances. Carol and Mark looked at each other, and I could see that they were finally comprehending the magnitude of what they had lost. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just access to a future inheritance. It was the trust, respect, and unconditional love of the two most important women in their lives. How much time do you need? Mark asked in a voice that was barely audible. As much time as it takes, I replied, and maybe it will never be enough. 6 months later, I was in the garden of my new house, a small property I had bought on the outskirts of the town where Stella and I had found peace. It was a Sunday morning, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the perfume of the gardenias I had planted next to the kitchen window. Stella was away at college, studying psychology, motivated by everything we had been through together. The doorbell interrupted my morning routine. When I opened it, I found Carol and Mark standing on my porch, but they were completely different people from the ones I had seen half a year ago. Carol had regained a healthy weight. Her hair was shiny, and her eyes had a clarity I hadn't seen in years. Mark stood with his back straight, his hands not trembling, and for the first time in a long time, he looked me directly in the eyes. "Hello, Mom," Mark said in a calm voice. "We know you weren't expecting to see us, and we respect if you don't want to talk." Carol nodded beside him. "We just wanted to bring you this," Carol added, holding out a sealed letter. "It's a formal apology, but it's also something more." I took the letter with curiosity and invited them to sit in the wicker chairs on the porch, but I kept a certain distance. "How did you know where I live now?" I asked, as I carefully opened the envelope. "Stella gave us your address," Mark replied, but only after we completed the 6-month family therapy program and showed her the changes we've made. The letter contained much more than apologies. It was a detailed plan of how they had completely restructured their lives. They had sold the big house they couldn't afford and had moved into a modest apartment. Carol had found a part-time job and was studying accounting online. Mark had accepted a lower-paying position, but one without the pressure that had led him to make desperate decisions. "We also included our therapist's reports," Carol explained. "We don't expect you to trust only our words after what we did." Her voice was different, more mature, without that artificial sweetness she had used for years to manipulate situations. I read each page in silence while they waited patiently. The professionals' reports were clear. They had done real work to understand the roots of their behavior. Carol had discovered that her obsession with economic status came from a childhood of deprivation she had never processed. Mark had confronted his tendency to see money as the solution to all problems, a distorted perspective he had developed after his father's death. "And what do you expect from me now?" I asked, closing the folder. "Nothing," Mark replied immediately. "We don't expect instant forgiveness. We don't expect you to change your will. We don't expect access to your money. We just hope for the possibility of rebuilding a relationship over time if you decide it's possible." Carol leaned forward in her chair. "Jane, over these months, I've understood something I never understood before. I didn't respect you as a person. I saw you as a resource." Her voice broke slightly. "I never valued your sacrifices, your intelligence, your strength. I reduced you to a source of money, and I am deeply ashamed." "And I," Mark added, "never truly became an independent man. I kept expecting my mom to solve my problems like when I was a child. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't worthy of me either." There was a long pause as I processed their words. Stella arrived at that moment, returning from college with her books under her arm. Upon seeing her parents, her expression remained neutral, but I could see a glint of hope in her eyes. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Dad," she said simply, sitting on the porch step. "Hello, my love," Carol replied with tears in her eyes. "How are your studies going?" It was a simple question, but it was laden with respect for Stella's autonomy, very different from the demands and expectations of the past. "They're going well," Stella replied. "I'm specializing in family therapy. I want to help other families communicate better before they get to the point we reached." Her words were like a gentle dagger for Carol and Mark, but they also carried an implicit hope. I got up from my chair and walked to the porch railing, looking toward the mountains in the distance. "Over these months," I said finally, "I've had time to reflect on many things. I've remembered the boy I raised, Mark, before pressure and greed changed him. I've remembered the young woman I met when you started dating my son, Carol, before financial worries hardened her." I turned to look at them. "I can't pretend that what happened didn't happen. You betrayed me in the most profound way possible. But I also can't ignore that people can change if they truly commit to it." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I'm going to propose something," I continued. "We can start with meetings like this once a month here on neutral ground. We will rebuild trust slowly, step by step. If after a year of these meetings we all feel that there's a solid foundation, we can consider a closer relationship." Carol and Mark nodded immediately. "That's more than we deserve," Mark said, "and we'll completely respect your conditions." "There's one more condition," I added firmly. "Never, absolutely never are we going to talk about money, inheritances, or wills. If that topic ever comes up, these meetings are permanently over." They both nodded vigorously. Stella got up and hugged me. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered in my ear, "for giving us this opportunity, but also for teaching me that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and that true love requires mutual respect." As Carol and Mark drove away in their car, I stayed on the porch with my granddaughter, watching the sun set behind the mountains. I didn't know if this second chance would work, but I had learned that wisely managed hope was different from naivety. For the first time in a long time, the future felt full of possibilities instead of threats, and that, on its own, was a victory. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly just wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.